Hey, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Always count on me to walk into a silent room and disrupt the peace.
I like it. I'll give it just another minute to see if anybody else is joining us today. All right, go ahead and kick it off. Walk through at least the updates that we wanted to cover today, and maybe point some of our virtual viewers to some resources that they can find later. So welcome everyone. Lula office hours community meeting for December 9th, 2024. If anybody has anything they want to discuss, please go ahead and add it to the Q&A. Otherwise, we'll run through the topic agenda for the day and kind of as usual, keep it open and flexible. People want to talk about something, wonderful. Problems, concerns, criticism, all open and available for feedback. So I think to kick it off, really what we wanted to highlight first and foremost is the, I'd say, releases on the onset of holidays. And so we kind of keep to a 2-week release cadence. And one of those weeks was holiday break. So left us with 1 week to kind of see like what else is meaningful. Is it worth releasing? All the normal questions we ask ourselves. And so one of the neat pieces of, I'd say the last couple weeks is OSCAL released version 1.1.3. And I believe I linked to that maybe in one of these. Yeah. Hopefully, I guess it's not technically in there. Release here. So 1.1.3 release, number of changes that got implemented. And so what that means for this team is dissecting what happened here and then pull these changes first and foremost back into Go OSCAL. So it's our Golang OSCAL library. And so you can see the release for that here, basically getting this update in, getting a couple other miscellaneous changes in, and release. That release essentially includes now the addition of all the 1.1.3 OSCAL Golang types so that other projects, other implementations can use those types for their own OSCAL purposes. For Lula, that is really a backbone critical to how we ingest and produce all of the OSCAL, to include OSCAL that we haven't quite covered yet for the models that aren't yet available, but will be. And so that leads us over to, in particular, release, do this work for Go OSCAL. So figure out what that delta of changes looks like. Get that merged in. We got that merged in, released. Once that release was through, Lula was, those changes were picked up for Lula. And so we got that included so that we could release 0.13.0 on Friday. So you go ahead and hit that and see the delta of changes. Pretty minimal all in all, but things with which we're cleaning up the repository, adding more documentation, adding underlying features. And so resolve all controls in a profile. That's, I would say, not user facing just yet, but a mechanism of like, hey, these things are going to be valuable. We want to try to start to adjust some of our very catalog driven component definition creation, or definition, if you will, and allow for the use of profiles therein, especially when it comes to the SSP, which is a work in progress that we'll cover. And then besides that, switching to OSCAL 1.1.3 is default. So if somebody picks up Lula today, they don't even have to worry about switching versions and keeping up to date with the OSCAL version. That's good. But there are going to be a number of people that already have OSCAL artifacts. And while it definitely would be a good recommendation, hey, go look at the OSCAL release. Take a look at what changes were included in here and figure out what you need to do to update your OSCAL to the latest release. There's a lot baked into that, and especially if it's a big change. These changes all consolidated down don't amount to a ton of changes to the underlying schema, but you would have to sort through these one-on-one. And so what we've been trying to do with Lula is, again, reduce cognitive burden of how you use OSCAL. How can we make that experience a little bit better? And so I just wanted to call out the command that's been with Lula for quite some time now, Lula tools upgrade. And this allows you to pass in your OSCAL file. And basically, this will perform the upgrade of whichever version you were at previously and upgrade it to the latest. You can also specify which version you want to upgrade to if for some reason you don't want to upgrade to latest. I think there's some pieces of the orchestration that we have built in there, but largely it's doing schema compliance validation for you as you're doing the upgrade. So it's not just going to go in and say, if we were to bring up a repo that has OSCAL, for instance, I need to close this other stuff out so I can see what I'm doing. If we were to open up a repository that has OSCAL, for instance, and perform an upgrade, it's not just going to bump this to the latest. It's actually validating the schema across, hey, if we try to upgrade to this to the latest and then run that through schema validation, does it fail for some reason? There are still constraints with which we want to try to make things better going forward, but this is to start to reduce that cognitive burden, right? So if we, for instance, have a repository, this is UDS core. It's the first one I could think of that has assessment results in a component stored in them, with which we can access them quickly. And so I've got a component definition in here. I've got an assessment results file in here. They're both 1.1.2 because that was the latest up until recently. If I've got Lula, and I've got the latest release, 0.13.0, I can run Lula tools upgrade and pass in the component file. And if we were looking at it, we would have seen that changed. Largely 1.1.3, this file wasn't structured to the same structure as the types for Lula writing the file out by default. So it moved some stuff around, but largely what you would see is the content stayed the same. We validated that once upgrading to 1.3 that it is still schema compliant. We could run this through lint just to get an extra layer there. And this is not only for component definitions. Keep in mind, you've got assessment results files. Lula by default will start producing 1.1.3 files when they're net new files. But if you need to upgrade your files, you can also pass in assessment results, upgrade those. You pass in your catalogs, profiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's kind of just a quick peek behind some of the underlying behaviors that we'd like to see change with OSCAL, like the user experience mainly. But yeah, if you need to go update your OSCAL files to 1.1.3, there's an option for you to do so and kind of hide, if you will, some of the underlying changes so that maybe they don't have to overwhelm you if you go look at the latest release of OSCAL. Any questions on those releases? Cool. Moving on, I just wanted to, again, every now and again, try just to highlight the project board. If you're ever interested on like what's going on, what's priority, why, some of that maybe still be a little bit of an ambiguous task, but you can come to, in particular, like if we were to go to Lula, look at projects at the top, you can click on Lula and Friends. It'll take you over to this project board and you can kind of see like what's going on. You can see what's in review, what's in progress, things that are kind of staged, ready for work, just the way that we operate. We also track a variety of other contributions. So all in all, if you wanted to get some more insights as to what's going on, you can find that here. Notable ones I think were worth calling out. SSP generation is in PR, as well as the initial report command. So if we head over to PRs, if you want to take a look at those, by all means, initial report, initial generate SSP, I think those would be really exciting, especially to start working down, one, supporting more and more of the models so that we can get across complete coverage. And then two, like quick reporting, high level reporting of, what kind of data could be valuable for people to want to get quickly. Things like one, amount of controls, two, if we're talking about component definitions, it may be just amount of controls. It might be amount of controls by, different frameworks. Could also be once we start adding more support for the models of like things you might want to check for, like, hey, if I have an SSP, how many of the controls have a reference to a component versus ones that don't? So all in all, trying to like expedite some of that, like, hey, how are we doing type stuff. Once you get to the assessment results, we could start quickly reporting on amount of controls passing, failing, unvalidated. Really, the world's pretty open to us there, but this gets us rolling and gets a Lula report command available by default. And so I think that's important. And then API domain, we've talked about it in a couple of different meetings before. I think we've even kind of like walked through some examples with the help of community members, which has been great, but continue to iterate here. So we've done a lot of great work for making the API domain a lot better than its previous state of just a very generic get. And now there's a lot more capabilities and options and things that you can do to configure that to make it hopefully much more suitable for a variety of different use cases. Us in particular, we're looking at like, okay, well, now that we've got it over this initial hurdle, like how to make it meaningful for the things that we know we want to look at. But I imagine there's also a variety of things we don't know that we want to look at. So if you have some ideas, example APIs, example applications that have APIs that you would want to hit with Lula, I'd say like, please feel free to call them out anytime. We could talk about them here. We could talk about them in the Slack channel. The more examples that we have to pull from and the data therein would be, I think, valuable overall. And so if you want an example, we're looking at like something like Keycloak. Keycloak has a very opinionated process for trying to access some of that data. And so we're trying to start to bridge that gap and like what makes sense in the API domain, what makes sense with something else if and when the need comes. But how far can we extend that domain before it becomes too complex? And I think there's going to be, I don't think I'm taking a novel stance by saying I think there's going to be some learning to do across like when does something need a little bit more custom massaging in order to make it meaningful or valuable. All right, I think that covers my rambling for today. Q&A. Open it up. If anybody wants to discuss anything, please feel free to. Otherwise, we can move questions, comments, etc. to Slack.
So question on your Go Oscal release stuff, is that the piece that you have to create all of your Go structs each time there's a new update to Oscal, and until something like what Richard Sherman's working on is done, where you just inherit or generate all that automatically? Is that where that happens?
Yeah, we see it kind of right now as the common layer for like type generation. And like right now, everybody, if you kind of look across the projects, is doing it in similar ways. But it changes obviously language to language. And so very much right now, like it serves as the point for Golang library. I'd say, consumption of those types once they are made available, once they are generated. But yes, to your point, there are kind of some other initiatives that we're following and others are following too, to maybe try to commonize some of that. The way that I think I've understood it to date is there should still always be the layer for Go Oscal. And maybe we move the generation logic somewhere else. Like if we can really nail the whole like Golang type generation vision that Robert and myself and others across the ecosystem have. But then the output of that process, the output of that logic would essentially just continue to, I'd say, get stored and be retrievable from something like the Go Oscal project.
Anything in particular you want us that have hours to work during the holidays when all of our peers are out and about holidaying, that I haven't been on these calls for a few weeks? So I'm like, oh, I'm going today for this call.
So if you could just work through your entire security process and just fill our GitHub with like issues and feature requests, that would be great. You could just do all of that for us. Is that no?
That's perfect. That's exactly.
I would say like what we do want desperately is feedback, whatever it is. If it's questions or ideas or like, how does this thing work? Or I tried it and nothing makes sense, or I tried it and I loved it, right? So anything would be nice. Not to jump right in over Brant, but I wanted to get excited about that because like anything you do with us and give us feedback on would be awesome. Tell me why some other open source project is better at this or different or worse, and that would be helpful information. I'm not above begging.
All right.
Yeah, I think that last the last part of that really resonates with me too, which is like, is there a feature with which you're using multiple tools and you don't need to? Like, I'm not against using multiple tools to accomplish a job, but it would be really interesting to see like, hey, like this is a common Oscal feature that we think all tooling should make available. I think profile resolve is honestly like a really good example of that. Like Oscal has the draft concept at the highest level. And so like all tools supporting doing that and kind of meeting the standard, I think would be a really good goal to reach towards. But I think there's probably a variety of other activities too, where it might make sense to establish like some common logic.
Where are these meetings, the recorded meetings, kept? Is like, are they available on the Slack community, like a link there, or is it like you have to know where to get them?
That is a really good question. I don't know that I've added the link to Slack, but I will.
And this is a new link, right? Compared to like a month ago when I last showed up to one of these things, or 2 months ago, whenever it was. Looked like this meeting is the one that has the recordings. It's a new link.
Yeah, this one has the recordings, recording in progress, and then the Lula-dev YouTube channel where we're storing these is on the playlist for community meetings.
Oh, cool. Okay. Should be able to find that.
So I will get a link to this moved over. But that's it's a really good question. Cool. Outside of that, I think more to your question, Richard, I can't think of anything targeted at the moment that we really like definitively need people to look at, but I would like to start to bucket different kinds of like activities to where feedback driven could be one. I'd like to get more good first issues thrown out for people who want to be spending their time contributing to the project. Marked a recent one as a good first issue. And so I think variety of, depending upon what you're asking for, it's a lot of us making requests of you, but I would like to ensure that that's a two-way path to like, what can we be doing to obviously make the project more meaningful to everyone.
That's cool. And in theory, my organization supports us being involved in contributing to open source projects, right? So an old task list that's, kind of counter to that sometimes, but that's certainly something that, when they're not there to give tasks because they're on vacation during the break, then, that kind of frees me up a little bit to poke around. And that good first issues, you've got those flagged in your repository, right up on GitHub. Like, seems like there's a tag or something that's first issues, or a pointer in the docs or something like that I've seen. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's some pointers to it. I don't know how well spread those are at the moment, but right at the top, you can usually always just click good first issue and get a quick filter.
Cool.
Awesome. Any other topics of interest for OSCAL or assessment automation with the validations, or Lula in general?
I think I might have not said Robert when I said, so I need to update the name I used for him in my brain. But I might reach out to him too and get involved that way on stuff. The generation, the meta schema. There's lots of things that have popped up with FedRAMP and other things that they're using. I'm like, oh, I got to learn meta schema now, I guess. But I appreciate all of the opportunities to support, I guess, and the feedback. So yeah, feel free to ping me anytime, Kristen, when you come up with the specific things. The generic's great too. Leaves it open. So.
You're going to start seeing like just issues with your name directly. I warn you. You don't want to encourage me. Give me too much power there.
Yeah, so just for broader awareness for the things we were discussing, I'll put a link to Metaschema Code Gen and the repository. I've talked, I think I'm not the only one, went around and talked to a lot of people using OSCAL. Metaschema isn't inherently super approachable for a variety of reasons. And so a lot of us, when we were saying like, hey, I need to write a tool, but I need types for my tool, and I want to do a lot of those things, like the JSON is super accessible, the JSON schema at the end of the day. And so that has been I think a super large enabler to the fact that that exists as an output of the meta schema production of multiple different types of schemas. But one of the initiatives that been going back and forth with Robert Sherwood, as you can see, I think, and it's worth certainly calling out, is the idea of meta schema code gen and like having some common logic that could exist somewhere open in the ecosystem that would allow us to really get the meta schema data into an intermediary format, and then from there produce different language data types. So Python, Rust, Golang, etc. All from a single source. Otherwise, all of us who do it independently today are all doing it independently. Every time there's an OSCAL release, I think we all have to put something new on our backlog. And maybe that doesn't change, but there is going to be a point in the future where there's a breaking change to OSCAL, and we're all going to get hit with that wave of cognitive burden of like, okay, I need to figure out how to address this. And if we weren't all doing it in silos, I think it'd be a huge valuable effort. So Robert has kind of spearheaded doing this specifically for Python as a very like good, well-scoped like first stab of Python to Python. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of things that still need to be done, but it would be great to start commonizing what this looks like. And so I think that's a worthy call out. Keep tabs on this. I've been talking with Robert, I think even as of last week, on some of this logic. So to your point, that could be also a very good entry point for how to contribute to something that has a very wide impact. Wonderful. I have nothing else. If anybody else has questions or concerns, definitely feel free to call them out. Otherwise, we could call this meeting. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending this week. If you have any questions or want to hear anything further, propose ideas, feel free to call them out to the Lula-dev Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack space. And then otherwise, we will see you all next week.